A challenge with the IARC working group that dealt with shift work was just what exactly is shift work and night work. I mean, shift work, you can come up with many kind of standard definitions, but really what constitutes work, night work? Is it any time during the evening, working any time during the evening, or night shift? Is it only people who are permanently on nights? There are many different patterns of shift work, rotating shift being one of the most common in terms of both manufacturing and healthcare. So there was a lot of discussion here about the different definitions, but certainly the purpose for this couldn't be to arrive at a definition, it was just to kind of outline what some of the issues were, because in fact we have to go with how people treated shift work in their particular studies. I've given some examples here of how it's defined. In Finland, they define greater than 3 hours between 11 o'clock and 6 in the morning. In the UK, a 7-hour shift that includes some time between midnight and 5. France wants you to do at least 2 evening shifts or night shifts per week. Germany defines it in terms of days in the year. So lots of different definitions. This is the shift work, kind of what we call the prevalence. This is survey data on shift work in Canada. In fact, what the working group saw was statistics from dozens of countries, all of which was collected in a slightly different way. But mostly it told the same story, that if you look at rotating shift, regular evening shift, and regular night shift, in most industrialized countries we're looking at 15 to 20% of the working population. So a fairly substantial portion. A little higher in a few countries as I remember it, but generally it's somewhere in that 15 to 20%. That's because it's captured with this kind of a questionnaire, but certainly some of the people who are on call, some of the people doing irregular shifts might also be doing night shifts. So it's important to recognize this is very common. Now, it varies quite a bit across industries, as you can see here. Accommodation and food service has got the highest proportion of people, as you might guess. Hotels, restaurants where people are eating in the evening and night. This healthcare and social assistance, these are fairly broad categories. This is Canada data, but that includes all the healthcare workers, and if we split them out from social assistance, the proportion would go higher. Whereas construction, agriculture, pretty much done during the day shift. In particular, this evaluation focused in on women, because the main site, for those of you who haven't read ahead, is breast cancer. So what you see here is that the patterns for men, this is the number of men and versus women employed in different sectors where they work night or evening shift. And so when you're talking about night shift among men, the single biggest group by far is manufacturing workers for night, and this is actually almost all rotating shift. For women, it's healthcare and accommodation and food service and some of these other ones. The exposure group discussed a number of different things that became, I think, kind of themes that we were trying to think across for the entire working group. I have some of the questions listed here. How do we actually define a night shift? Do we define it simply as the basis of an activity? But what's the underlying thing we're looking at? Is it work involving disruption of circadian rhythms? And how do we actually match up the human and animal studies when one is calling shift work and the other one is really a bunch of animals under experimental conditions that we're trying to mimic certain things, but we're looking at perhaps different things. And it was a bit of a challenge to try to match up the definitions there. But the last thing that I think became something that was always on the minds, at least of a number of committee members, particularly many epidemiologists, is trying to remember that shift work is actually an exposure circumstance. We certainly had a lot of discussion of melatonin as a marker of shift work, but shift work itself actually disrupts biological systems, as you'll hear later, but also social lives. There's issues around stress, dietary changes, a number of other things that happen when people work shifts. And those kind of things, you know, both we're thinking about how shift work impacts people's lives, but also people's tolerance to shift work is influenced by many of those same factors. I certainly saw one study reviewed in the IARC monograph that said that maybe 10% of people can actually adjust to shift work, and that most other people, maybe 20%, have to quit very shortly after they start being put on night shifts because it's very, very hard to do that, and maybe 70% of people just kind of struggle on for the entire period that they're on. But certainly there's a wide variety of people that can actually, you know, wide variety of conditions that influence whether people can adapt